We are live. All right. Also, my audio has been acting up. I should have actually taken the opportunity before this to ask you a bit about my mic because I think you have the same one, Mike.
I do.
Mi-
Let's see if I
mi-
can. There we go.
yes, Mike has the
Sure,
same mic.
MV7.
Huh?
Ayo.
Or does that mic have a mic? Whoa!
Hey.
Okay, welcome everyone. But anyway,
You know
so
my
my
profile
audio.
picture is also a mic.
There you go. So my mic. Oh jeez, like I'm gonna stop it now, but I want to say like, and this one as well. My mic has been acting up. So, but anyway, yeah. Let's. Otherwise, we're never gonna leave this. But I'll ask you afterwards. We're not gonna live debug online. All right. So, yes, we have a surprise in store today. So, unfortunately, Ben can't make it. He is trying to salvage some tech stack from like exploding. Xandor is trying to salvage his body from exploding. So, like, apparently he's pretty sick. And also, I didn't get any sleep last night. My daughter and my wife were kind of like projectile vomiting the whole night, and
Also exploding.
exploding. And um, so my brain is just like processing information like a 46K modem at the moment. So given all of that, we thought this is the perfect time for us to talk about React server components. If there's ever a time to talk about React server components, now is the perfect time in the kind of mental state that all of us are in. Yeah, so I think Mike and I kind of decided, because it's just the two of us, it might be a good opportunity to do a bit of a more focused discussion. And because something like React Server Components is something where the scope can just grow so big and there's all these rabbit holes, it's also maybe a good idea to do it while it's now just the two of us. And then we can maybe at a future date expand on some of the key things we discussed as a group, instead of trying to unpack all of that as one big group. So yeah, I think if this is the first time you're hearing about React Server Components, it might be a good idea for both of us to kind of give a shot at trying to describe it in normal language. Because I don't know about you, Mike, but it took me a while to really grok what React Server Components are. I think initially I thought it just had to do with serialization, and a standard for serialization. Turns out it's actually a lot more. Um, and like, so I don't know if you maybe want to start and give it a go, and then I'll try and do a version of it myself as well. Or do you want me to start?
I'd be happy for you to kick it off because I've never worked with server components, but
Mm, mm.
like I've looked at enough server component code to
Yes.
see some of the things, and I know enough about the lead up to server components to understand why they were introduced.
Okay. You like you've just been following the drama. You don't actually know what the drama. It's like React. It's
Sorry,
that
I
like
work on enterprise applications that make money.
it's like React server side commands. No one knows what it means, but it gets the people going. Pretty much
It has
like,
got everyone's hair up, which is entertaining.
yeah. So all right, and I think maybe I'll try and draw this out. So I'll try and frame it as simple as possible, and you can tell me if I'm being too reductionistic or if I'm just completely wrong. So basically, in your stack, like let's say you're building a traditional kind of like, let's not even go like Next.js or whatever. Let's go like Vite, React. You have your kind of web app that lives over here, and then you probably have some type of API somewhere. Okay, and these things are talking to one another. All right, so then sometimes what happens is you get into these scenarios where and I think this is also the thing, is what I think is sometimes missing from the conversation is, because I think the first thing people ask is like, okay, but why don't you just wrap everything in suspense? Why don't you just use suspense? Why introduce a completely new thing? So let me start where, as I understand it, I'm open for correction. I'm still also trying to wrap my head around it. Is React server components are mostly meant to solve a very specific problem, but it does have a lot of other benefits that spring forth from it. But as I understand it, the initial problem that it tries to solve is around data waterfalls. So let's say you have you have this type of thing kind of a lot, where you have some type of app shell, and then inside that you have your sidebar and your main content. And let's say in your main content you have 3 tabs or whatever, or 4 tabs, and this tab is selected, and because that tab is selected, um, so this is kind of like, if you've used Remix or something like that, this idea would be very familiar to you. It's also very much how the new Next.js. I am sharing my screen, right, Mike?
You are.
Okay, that would have been very embarrassing. Okay, so effectively, with this type of thing in your kind of very traditional app, you might very easily get into.
I was waiting for you to say Next.js Remix Edition.
Well, there you go. Generally, I would like to talk in more broader terms, but yeah, let's just call things what they are. The remixed Next.js. Okay, so effectively, if we were to look at this type of thing, so a lot of you have a lot of apps where you have kind of you have your routes, and those routes mostly do a single API call to get the data for that route, and when you go to another one, and so forth and so forth and so forth. But then you start getting into a certain level of complexity where you have this type of thing, where you have kind of this waterfall happening, because the things on the outside influence what gets called on the inside. So starting at the topmost level, so the shell itself, are you logged in or not logged in? Okay, so it needs to ask the API for that first. Okay, so let me just draw that. Or and then once that comes back, it might need to check, for example, are you on the free plan or are you on the pro plan? Okay, so now goes back to the server again, and then when that comes back, it's like, okay, cool, you're currently looking at a product or whatever, and load the info for the product that's in here. Okay, so now that it knows you can only see products if you're on the pro plan, you are logged in, and then what specific product are you looking at? And let's just say here is kind of like the SKU or whatever. Okay, and then it does a request. Obviously, it's not going to request this if you are on the free plan. So all of this is kind of needs to happen sequentially. Okay, and then when it does that, it needs to maybe get info for the specific version, like you're looking at maybe the green version of it, or whatever. Okay, so you have all this chatter happening between the server and the actual UI, just in order to actually show all the info. Okay, so there's a couple of ways to do this. So if you really hate your users, you are going to wrap all of this in a promise all. Okay, you are going to just show a big white screen until all of this resolves, and then everything splashes on the screen. If you don't hate your users that much, you are probably going to use you're probably going to use suspense, or something like React query, or you're just going to manage it yourself with kind of use effect, and then based on what comes back, you fire another async thing. And just manually manage that back and forth and back and forth. So the big problem is that all these round trips start adding up. So even if you use suspense, this is going to show. Okay, all of this is going to show. Then this is going to pop in. Then this is going to pop in. then this is going to pop in. Okay, and that's okay. It's not the end of the world. You see that pattern quite a lot. And suspense definitely makes it easier to work with this type of thing. It's a bit of a pain to work with if you're not using something like suspense. But the main problem is that this space over here. Turns out that you can save a lot of time by actually just making this space shorter. So effectively, this is where React Server Components comes in. Like a very basic take on it would be, how about you move all of this on the server? And if let's say your DB is over here. So obviously now the round trips are not as long because you're not requesting from the client. So you have a lot more like shorter back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth over here. And then you send it all in one big chunk. Okay. So what I've just described is effectively, serialization. And well, part of it is serialization, but so effectively, like you already get like this type of thing with Next.js. You already get this type of thing with like Remix and so forth. So what's the thing with React Server Components? Where do React Server Components come into the mix now? Well, so the main thing is that all these frameworks, whether it's Remix, whether it's Redwood.js, whether even, and I think also the term server components sometimes throw people. It's not even like you can do it for static site generation as well. So I don't really know whether Gatsby is still alive or not, but for argument's sake, you can like use this in Gatsby as well and so forth. Basically, everything that happens before like the JavaScript actually starts running. And the main value is so there is a lot of value in terms of moving your code closer to the actual where the data resides. But you can already do that, but like it's very fragmented in terms of how that works, like all the foot guns associated with that. So in short, the main thing around React Server Components is it is basically it's basically a specification in terms of a standardization of this is how all of these do this type of thing. And so this is probably something else that we're going to get into is that obviously Next.js is a behemoth at the moment. Like its market share is unparalleled when it comes to JavaScript frameworks at the moment. And because of that, by nature, like there's a very strong like association, either implicitly or explicitly, between these two, and that also makes a lot of people uncomfortable. But like at this point, just because Next is kind of the biggest, like kind of market share wise way to do this, you are naturally going to have to talk about this one when you talk about that, and likewise talk about this one when you talk about that one. Yeah, I don't know. Like, how was that, Mike? Was that sufficient?
I think there's a big aspect that we need to chat about.
Yes.
And I'm going to start that off by first talking about the use client directive. So if you're using React Server Components or Next.js, you can either have a client-side component or a regular component, which will now be a React Server component.
Yeah, or you can explicitly say use server as well. But I don't think that does anything because it is by default.
But implicitly some people use server.
Yeah, some people do this just for explicitness.
Yeah. So
yeah,
for me, the naming convention used here, I think causes some confusion. This distinction of use server and use client, I kind of the mental model that this fits into for me is Astro. Yes. And I think a much easier way, or rather the way that I have framed it in my mental model, is similar to Astro's load directive. Use client is essentially like Astro's load directive. If you want state, if you want JavaScript to be running on the front end, you'll use client. Otherwise, it's only going to render on the server, and it's going to be stateless when it reaches the front end.
That's
so
a really
both,
good, that's a really good point, and that's definitely something that I kind of glossed over here, is the fact that pre-React server components, all of this was automatically hydrated, correct?
yes. So
So,
like
so you got
the big
hydration whether you
distinction.
wanted it or not. Yeah.
Yes, there we go. So for me, the hydration thing is a big deal. So like there's just so much to unpack here that like I'm trying to keep myself on track. But this distinction as to, hey, this needs to be something interactive, this needs to be a client component, it's now something that's explicit. Otherwise, React is going to try to optimize it for you. And before it reaches the client, it's going to be like, yo, we don't actually need JavaScript here. We're going to process all this JSX for you, and we're just going to chuck through a whole bunch of HTML. I think it's a good thing. And then like another distinction that I want to highlight is like there is a lot of haziness between server-side rendering and React server components.
Yes.
I have a not a great understanding of it. Like I've got some understanding, but like I'll probably say some things that are just unequivocally correct if I talk about things in detail. But they are two different things, and they can be combined. So it is an important thing to try to keep distinct from each other, because server-side rendering allows even greater power on top of things like this, like HTML streaming and essentially static content streaming, which I think is incredibly cool.
Yeah, I also stand to be corrected, but like with React server components as well, it ships some type of binary over the wire, correct? It doesn't just ship straight up serialized strings.
I'm not sure. I believe it does. If I think back to the early days of the React server component stuff that I read, like the whole hype was around essentially creating like a socket where you can stream data through.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is a lot closer to things like what's a gRPC? If I like, once again, I stand to be corrected. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments. But so this is my understanding. So if you were to look at the HTTP request in your network tab, like it'll be garbled. It won't just be like a string version of the HTML or whatever.
Okay, so why is that, and what are the cons of this, and what are the pros of this? Like, I love gRPC. I think protobufs are awesome, but I think this is a like, seeing as this is JavaScript breakpoints, I think we should just rush into this a little bit and explain why this trade or why this decision was made.
Yes. I actually don't know. So I don't know whether that was a rhetorical question.
I'm giving you the opportunity to chat about why gRPC is cool. But essentially what it boils down to...
So sorry, let me give it a shot, and then you tell me how wrong I am. So my assumption would be like performance. You know, like you can probably, if you encode the data in some manner, you can probably ship something a lot smaller and also decode it way quicker than if you were to rely on just turning it into a string and then turning it back into something that you can use in memory.
Okay, so I'm going to give you my idiot explanation. Like, I always try to dumb things down as much as possible, but
yes, give me the skull-proof explanation.
I'm not sure. I mean, if I can understand, then you'll be able to understand it really easily. If we're comparing it
don't
to
worry,
JSON,
I got a graph here. I just Googled gRPC. Okay, we're good. Like, don't worry, you don't need to explain it.
I mean, great. So if we're working in JSON, like essentially I'll have to give you the representation of the object, and I'll be like, cool, the name is Skulk, the age is 21, the occupation is bona fide badass. Whereas if you've got a list of the keys already, I can just be like, Skulk 21 badass, and that already it shortens the amount of data that needs to be sent over the wire. So gRPC can sometimes see, I think it sees on average just over 30% deduction in terms of data that's sent. But then also on your side, you when it gets deserialized, doesn't necessarily have to, like, you can optimize for the shape that you're working with specifically, because JSON is a bit slow. So you can send binary over the wire, which then gets deserialized into a type safe, or like something that you can easily recognize on your end.
So I assume at a very face level, like face value level, like I don't know if you've used something like JSON pack before, whatever. It's probably a bit more nuanced than this, but JSON pack is also like something I can take like a JSON object and encode it into something that's about like half the size by effectively just like kind of using shorthands for things, and where things are repeated, like using a symbol to indicate that, kind of like minification almost to a certain degree. But I assume it does a lot more than just that. But I assume one of the benefits is you can almost minify it.
Yes, 100%. So it goes through the minification, but also you're not sending the keys.
So beforehand, like I assume the client and the server can be in agreement in terms
exactly.
of okay. So it's almost like, like the client and the server agree in terms of what does it mean.
There's a contract.
Yeah, what does this?
This is why TRPC.
Okay, cool. So and then if you're using JSON, effectively, it's like every single thing you're
pass
like,
that JSON first.
The name, so effectively the name is this, the language is this, the bio is this. All right, next user, the name is this. So every time you have to, so it encodes the actual structure and the data. Okay, that's really cool. Okay, is that the extent of it, or is that just the simplified version for people like us?
Are we talking about gRPC?
Well, I assume you don't know too much about what happens in React server components.
No, I can't speak about how that's done. But if we're talking about the how that streaming is happening, I'm guessing that, like, based on what you've said, this is probably what they're doing, because it is quite a common approach to handling data.
And if you're controlling that kind of end-to-end already through something like server components, like, you'd be stupid to not do it, because it's 100%. Not human facing. I think you get the same with kind of like TRPC as well.
Yes. I don't know. Can you look at the payload in TRPC?
I actually don't know.
I would guess that you can, because on the front end it's just a wrapper around React query. So I'm guessing that it's still. Wait, hold on. But they've said that it's not REST compatible.
Then
so I actually have no idea.
Okay.
But what I was going to say is, at risk of going down a rabbit hole, something that's really curious. So gRPC is Go based, or I mean it's Google RPC, but it's very commonly used in Go. JSON encoding and decoding is actually surprisingly slow in Go, because it is something that's surprisingly difficult to do. So that's why you often see gRPC being used in Go specifically, because of that cost. What's absolutely baffling for me is Python's JSON handling is actually faster than Go, because it's C. But there's a whole bunch of things. Like, JSON is such a weird spec, and handling it is a surprisingly complicated can of worms to deal with. So I totally expect that they're not using JSON to or something like that to send the data over. Because I mean, a lot of the benefit of server components is, shrinking the bundle size to get to the user more quickly.
And let's talk about, so what these two things have in common is this word RPC, and I think that also has a tie in with React server components, because effectively, you get all these things like server actions and whatever, which effectively turns your API calls into procedures. So RPC is effectively stands for remote procedure call. So TRPC is TypeScript RPC, and G, as Mike said, is Google RPC. So effectively, what this does is, it's actually, RPC used to be like kind of an old thing that was very popular back in the day, and then we kind of moved away from it. And it's Yeah, and it's coming back around now again. Like kind of that's the web. You go through these cycles, but effectively the goal, if you were to simplify it, would be that you want to abstract things that you do or information that you get or actions that you perform behind just a function or something that you can call a procedure. So instead of going like fetch, da, 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 and here's the body, and whatever. All of this is abstracted behind just something like, add user, and you just say skulk or whatever. And all the stuff that gets sent, what gets back, all of that is abstracted behind this procedure call, basically. So to a certain degree, like this is also part of what React server components also provide. And I don't necessarily even know whether this was the intent, but you would be stupid to not have this type of abstraction if you once again.
I want to add just a little idiot tidbit. Like you I think it's nice to like kind of summarize it. You're essentially calling a function on another machine. Like remote procedure call sounds scary, but all it is it's a function that's somewhere else. And that's why like it's calling a network resource as a function is a pretty interesting idea.
So that's actually a very valid point, because what I just described here, you can actually do this yourself without having access to the machine itself, just abstract that. But I think one thing that kind of is unique, or I almost want to say indicative of RPC, is that you actually define these things on the server, or in the source. So I wouldn't necessarily create all of this on the front end and just you'd want to do like that's good practice in general. Like if you're using some type of API that you don't even have control over, to abstract that behind just like a function or something you can call. But I think with RPC in general, so if we look at something like tRPC, you actually create the logic on the server and then you pass it to the front end. So and that ensures that or I don't want to say you pass it automatically then gets exposed as something, yes, that you can call on the front end. So you don't create it on the front end. You just it automatically gets passed along. Yes, it's hard to explain these things. But yeah, I actually haven't dabbled
them too.
Yeah, I actually haven't dabbled that much in like server actions and stuff, and purely because I understand that despite what Next.js says, they are still very experimental. They're not stable. So I don't want to actually spend too much time on them if they're not. Once again, I stand to be corrected. I don't know if you've played around with like server actions and those type of things yet.
I haven't, but I'd like to use this as a segue for another question. How do server actions differ from something like what I think it's the loader function in Remix, or like get static props, or like how are server actions different from the old way of doing stuff on the server in meta frameworks?
So I also think there's a bit of nuance here. So you're saying so the old Remix way is the new Next way. So it's undeniable. It's undeniable that a lot of this new app router stuff has been very much influenced by what Remix did. So let's just get that out of the way. But so I can only speak to that from someone who hasn't really used Remix, as someone who's mostly used it in React Router. And to me, that is still something that you create in response to, because by definition, if you're just using the router, you don't have that coupling between the back end and the front end. So for me, it's still very much just like a quality of life thing to write a use effect that just fires on mount. So, or like a quality of life thing, just in terms of setting up my own React queries and whatever. Would that be an accurate summarization for someone who hasn't used it in Remix, who's only used it as in the routing?
And what the loader?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like it's the loader is essentially a mechanism to say, hey, I need this data here.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing in Remix, except you have a. So I'm speaking under correction here. It's been a while. It's probably been about a year and a half since I touched Remix. But you can say, cool, I'm going to. So I think Remix is a use loader hook that you can use in your client side component. And on the server side components, I think you export a like it's either a named export or a default export. Or no, I think it's a named export. And it's essentially things that run on the server side, and then you can use a hook to get them in the client side component. There we go. Beautiful.
Yes. Yeah.
And interestingly, everyone's kind of like, this came out, and everyone was just like, damn, this is a cool pattern. In the same way with signals, Solid.js or Solid Start is like identically this. So when I picked that up, it felt very familiar, but it's also a really nice pattern to follow. And
correct me if I'm wrong, but like, so what this just I assume would do is it effectively, if you're using something like React Query, it's just an abstraction over, like, for example, use query, and then I can't even remember the syntax, but then like having your function in there, and like all of that, and then creating the function, and all of this wiring up so that you have this nice thing, which is like a do thing return from use query, and then calling that. So I assume this is just like it kind of abstracts a lot of this, like boilerplate.
Yeah. So I mean so let's not dive into the syntax. My brain is itching. But like,
okay, I'm just gonna get a
screenshot.
I actually don't use React Query that much, so.
Okay, cool. So you'll see our const data is equal to use query, and you'll
okay. Let's just pretend that I wrote this. There you go.
Quality skunk.
Just like that, magic.
Yeah. So the query key is super important, and the promise is you can validate by the query key.
Yes.
So like what we're not seeing here is the backend, whereas the loader in the Remix stuff is essentially our backend.
Yeah.
So it's something that will run server side.
And I think also you need to wire up, what happens, like, based
loading
on
states.
And so I think, like, if you're using a router, or whether it's a built-in router in something like Remix, a lot of this can actually be set up on the router level instead of manually being handled, like, on the client.
Spot on.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does some of the work for you, but it kind of blurs that area between front end and back end, in the same way that gets server side props. Like it's, and this is the thing for me. It's like, I don't understand the distinction well between server actions and the old way of doing things. For me, they all kind of feel similar, but just let's write it in a different way.
Yeah.
And get some marginal gains by optimizing some stuff along the way.
I also think you have to, like, preface that with, when you say the old way, there was no way. Once again, I'm opening myself up to be corrected, but there was no old way to do this in Next. I think you got Next had, like, what was it? SWR. What was it? The React Query thing?
It wouldn't get server-side props be the equivalent to this?
Yes, but that's baked into the templating, and that only handles that only fires during serialization. So if I understand correctly, you can, and once again, I don't know enough about Remix to kind of say, like, to answer your question around this. But as far as I understand, the thing is with server actions is you can run them on actions. So if someone clicks a button or whatever,
Okay, cool. Yeah,
yeah,
that's a right. The penny just dropped. I remember Dan Abramov's thing. So
yes, is this not
Loader's bringing in the
case?
data. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there's no mutation here.
Yes, spot on.
Okay.
But also, so actions 100%. That's what we're looking for. SWR, I don't think would even do it for Remix because that's stale while revalidates. That's for fetching and caching.
Yes. So, but like the reason why I bring this up is that is actually what Next had previously is a lot closer to this than this. So it doesn't abstract this far. It's once again, it's very similar to React query. So then actions, I assume, would be. Hey, this is how my
me
brain
barking
works.
up the wrong tree. No, I did like. I was like, server actions. Can't remember what these are.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. Like, this is like we are putting our ignorance here on full display for everyone. But I also think that's useful. I think it's useful for people to kind of get us to see how we're trying to make sense of it and ask stupid questions. But yeah,
something I'm really good at.
Yeah, I might regret that later, but
at least the second part.
If you're watching this video, it means I haven't deleted it yet. So
we didn't lose our jobs.
Yay! So let me actually just bring up the documentation here. Okay, so if we look at Next.js, server actions, and granted, there's a lot on React server components as well, but like to me, this is the big thing where my brain is at regarding server components. So unfortunately, we need to dive into this first. But yeah, so they're kind of remote procedure calls executed on the server. Okay, they can only be used in use server directive. All right. And I think we can talk, like we touched briefly on this use server, use client thing. I think there's a lot still there to unpack, some super interesting stuff. Yeah, okay, cool. So it does also seem that in the sense where you trigger mutations and stuff, that would be from something close to like a form submission or whatever, not like a Ajax call, correct?
That is what I'm used to seeing in these sort of things. I mean, if we look at the examples there, the very first one is forms.
Exactly, and that's also a very Remix thing. I know, as someone who doesn't even really use Remix, I know kind of Remix's whole thing is kind of this idea of a form just being, the built-in form post.
How do we make it elegant?
Yes, it's built on top of like the HTTP specification. Oh,
sorry, I'm absolutely burning to see non-form elements.
Oh, like in terms of server actions.
On the right, it says on this page and about.
Wait. Non-form elements.
Yeah. Getting very dangerously close to. Oh wow.
Okay, but I guess this would be akin to. It would still be a HTTP request. Like so in a traditional like. Oh, should I invoke PHP now or? But I'm so scared to say those 3 letters. I'm so scared to say those 3 letters because if I say that, like now, that's going to open a can of worms. But let's not say PHP. Let's say Rails. Okay, so like this, it's still like very Rails-ish insofar that non-form elements are still an HTTP under the hood. I assume this would be a button. This would be like a navigation.
Okay, so again, playing the role of someone that's dumb. I mean, that's totally not me. It's just playing the role here.
Sure, Mike. Yeah.
Why is the
Yeah.
PHP thing such a big can of worms? Why is this Rails model such a big can of worms?
Okay. Why is PHP? Let's say, is React server components just PHP? Okay. Here we go. Okay.
Sorry, like maybe I must reframe my question. Like, why are people saying that this model is a bad idea?
Oh, okay. So not PHP specific. But,
yeah. Like,
you mean like actual pay? So I don't know. Like half the time, I don't know why people say things in the web space. It's one of three things. It's either they are not in a sober state, okay, when they're on Twitter or whatever, and like their brain isn't
is
working.
anyone?
They're on some mind-altering substance or whatever. Okay, that's hypothesis one. The other one is they have no idea what they're talking about. Okay. The third one is they actually have a way better idea of what they're talking about than I do, which means what they're saying doesn't make sense to me because they're saying something much smarter than I can understand. Those would be my three reasons why people say stuff that don't make sense to me. But yeah, why do people? So why do people like? Okay, so let's take a couple steps back. So why do people say that this? So let's just scope this. So when we say this, what we effectively, so I think there's also a tie in here with something like HTMX, correct? So I think that's very kind of talking about HTMX is also kind of like the angle you're talking about here, right? So in other words, you're binding things that happen in the UI to HTTP.
Yeah. So I mean, HTMX does write server-sent events.
Yes.
What is like? I've seen one thing that people is like, oh, this is absolutely terrible. Why would you do this about this model? And
So,
was around people talking about SQL injection.
Interesting. So I can't speak to that. I think it might also just be due to the type of apps that I build. But for me, why I think like it's not. I'm going to give the really unsatisfactory answer insofar that something isn't inherently bad or good outside of any specific business need or context. So I would say in terms of the type of stuff that I'm building, this approach would get more in the way than be helpful. So the type of things that I'm building is things that need to have some type of resilience in terms of internet connection dropping, or like super flaky connection, needs to be able to function somewhat offline. So more akin to what you would think about like software. So the type of stuff that you would like install with Electron or whatever. So in that case, like this model just falls apart because you need an internet connection. Okay, that's a non-starter. I think there's also, if you're thinking about this model in a very traditional sense, it also means that you're coupling your server logic and your client logic very closely. So I found that
do I
while
smell MVC?
Sorry?
Do I smell MVC?
Yeah, well, so no, but so here's the thing: is like I think a lot of the discussion and stuff around HTMX and a lot of the stuff, like relies on how easy it is for you to change things on the web server level, and I've actually found that teams are like so. There's usually more constraints, like in terms of things you need to think through. Let me just put it this way: like I think like we're assuming that most backends are built much nicer than they actually are in reality, and and databases are architected much nicer than what I found to be the reality. So in that type of world, like I think something like this would have a lot more traction. The reality is in a lot of cases you're working on projects where you have to massage that data that comes through the pipe into some way that it makes sense to users, from like this Frankenstein of API calls and services and third party like integrations and widgets that you pull in from some payment provider or whatever, you know. So I think that is why, for me personally, I wouldn't use this approach. But I think it's also it speaks to the type of stuff that I'm building. But I have a hunch that you were asking a rhetorical question, correct?
A bit of both. A bit of both.
Okay.
The
I'm
one
curious
thing
to
for
hear
me
your
is
take. Yeah.
Any language, any framework, anything allows us to write bad code. And I feel as though a lot of the argument against server actions is like, oh, can I do this terrible thing? Is that now a possibility? And like, you can do terrible things with Express. You can do terrible things with whatever you choose to. Like, it's always a thing. People don't add CSP on their stuff. Like, you know, cause is only used because it's mandated. It's always been possible to do terrible things. And I think a lot of the criticism against server actions and a bit of server components is the power that it does provide, both to do good and evil. And I think like sure, like I've seen people, like we've all seen people write really bad code, but it also like it empowers the developer to write more interesting things as well, and it gives us the ability
100%.
to do some potentially really cool things.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing is like, and this is what's always so frustrating when I hear criticism against React server components. And I do think this is symptomatic of just like the tech landscape and kind of the role that tech. No, like I don't think like I think it's like, I don't want to say toxicity, but like people are incentivized to have extreme takes on stuff.
You're talking about Twitter.
No, but just in general, like even if I think about ZA Tech or, you know, LinkedIn or whatever. So like I think people are incentivized to either think that, you know, React server components can literally raise people from the dead, or it's literally the apocalypse of the world as we know it right now, and it's like a bigger existential threat to humanity than climate change, you know. So like it's almost like those are the only two positions that I encounter, because I think saying that server components are cool and they're kind of neat, and but
what,
you know,
a mild take.
but yeah, but they're kind of meh, and they're nice, but yeah, sure, they're cool. I think like that's almost gonna. I don't know. Like it almost. I think people are scared that that's. I'm going on too much of a philosophical tangent now, but I think there's a degree to which, if you ask someone what music do you listen to, and they say, "Oh, I listen to everything," you're like, this guy doesn't know anything about music. And I think it's kind of the same. Like if you have a mild take, then people are just going to assume you actually don't know anything about the thing. And you're just like,
we're in a weird community, man.
yeah, it's but I also think like a lot, like if you don't know anything about it, like you are going to have a mild take because you don't have anything to base your opinion on. But like that correlation and causation. But
sorry,
yeah,
you mentioned getting philosophical. There's a great Kurzgesagt video about this like idea of the hot take and stuff.
Who? By whom?
I'll drop a link because the name is really difficult to spell.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, it's also around Twitter and kind of people being like polarized with their takes, and how kind of we dehumanize each other on the basis of these takes.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's let's get back to dev.
Yeah. Let's let's actually write some code. And my man, Linus. You can say what you want about him, but I like his thing about talk is cheap. Show me the code. But he doesn't live by his own words, because apparently to him talk is not cheap, because he says a lot of stuff.
Would you mind checking an example of a use action, just for people to see as well? I think it's a cool abstraction.
Cool.
And I feel we
Next.
missed out on that one. Remix.
Remix.
Yeah.
Okay. Use action data, or is it just plain action?
Yes. Use action data relies on the function action export. So where you were was perfect.
Oh, the previous one.
Either. It takes you to the same thing, I think. Or rather, the important thing is in both places. So exporting that action function is do something on the server for me. And then you can access that stuff by calling the action. So, there they've got a form, and then the form triggers that action.
Up here. Oh, I see. Yeah.
So there we go. On submit, you trigger the action, and that does something in your backend. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable abstraction.
So I do this, to a certain extent, even in my, single page apps, because, putting something as a form submission gives you a lot of free stuff out of the box, pressing enter to submit, and, actually being able to extract the key value pairs of the inputs straight from that event, and so forth. So but I think obviously what these type of things do is they go a step further, and they actually build it on top of the web HTTP process, whereas I'm just using the HTML integration.
So for me the big thing is you don't need to go and write a separate backend at this route. If you make a form submission in the same file, you can handle how that form submission is handled, and insert something into your database if that's what you want to do.
Yes. And I do think, as you mentioned, saying that something opens you up to dangerous things isn't a criticism in itself. And if anything, I think the React team has a history of not shying away from just giving you all the rope you need to hang yourself. We've spoken on several occasions about React isn't even gonna. Well, I don't know if it does it nowadays, but for a long time, whenever I saw this, React doesn't even give you a warning if you create a component in the rendering cycle. And that is a massive no. That is that is literally you're doing the worst thing you can possibly do in React, and it's just cool, you're probably meant to do that.
Hey, if you wrap it in a callback, use callback, then it's okay. I've seen people do this.
Oh jeez, man! How committed are you to writing your components? Okay, anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole. But so I think I'm not. I don't think that's a valid critique, and I also think the React team historically hasn't really worried about giving you the primitives and having you do what you want, even doing bad things with them, compared to something like Angular, which kind of goes more out of its way to protect you from yourself. But one thing that I think that I'm concerned about is coupling. So is are we creating more easy if you talk about the pit of success, or kind of making the easy thing, making the good
right
thing
easy
easy. Yeah. Are we making coupling too easy? and coupling your data modeling to your presentation?
I mean, that's a very, very difficult thing for me to have an opinion on. I've been going through a course by some guy. I think it's 3 Dot Labs. They're big in the Go community, and they essentially talk about, I don't remember what it is, but it's essentially like ingress and egress coupling.
Is it one of these? What 3 Dot Labs or what?
Yeah, I think it's 3 Dot Labs. They make
The
watermill.
letter 3.
3 space dot. Hold on, let me just search for watermill.
Oh yeah. .tech.
Awesome.
3 dots.
Hey, I wasn't totally wrong. Yeah, so
Is it this one?
Yeah, these guys are big brain.
I'll check it out.
So yeah, I've been watching one of their, I'm pretty sure it's one of their courses, but it's essentially about like the different types of coupling you have, and the guy speaks about there essentially being 11 types of coupling, and like how all these things, or how things can be interrelated. But essentially what it boils down to is, if you, like, that coupling exists no matter what, right? If you're fetching that data, that's a coupling. If you're calling that stuff in the same file, that's also a coupling. It's just what coupling are you choosing to use? I would argue that having that contract co-located makes it a little bit easier to prevent that contract from being broken. Whereas if you're having a REST API, you can very easily break that contract and get errors. Whereas having your backend and front end code coupled allows you to have full type safety and do like what's it, that cartoon, The Invincibles? Like, look what they need to mimic a fraction of my power. Like, if you look at what TRPC has to do to essentially simulate that coupling, right? Because that's what we're doing. To do kind of the magic that Remix gives you kind of for free. So like, I totally get you. It's a valid concern to to speak about coupling between the data and the view layer. But I always have this little bit of a weird thing that a lot of the time I kind of like that coupling, but like, you and I probably have fundamental disagreements there. I like using Tailwind because I think separation of concerns often gets in the way. So yeah, for me, blurring some of these boundaries is often beneficial. And like the abstraction that I would use is essentially using the action or whatever, essentially the same way that you'd use a handler or a controller or something like that, and just take in the request, validate it, and then call a service layer. And have that sort of abstraction, kind of the conventional clean code sort of thing. So yeah, for me, I don't have very polarizing feelings in this regard. But I have been going through a little bit of a weird phase in my dev stuff for the past year or so, where I feel everything's kind of the same. And it's just like, we're chunking things up in different ways and calling them different things, but it all boils down to the same thing at the end of the day. I've been watching way too much stuff about functional programming.
That's how we get you. But so yeah, I do hear what you're saying, and like, I think it's also important to note that coupling is a side effect of abstraction.
Yes.
Like coupling is the cost of abstraction. So the only way to not have any coupling in your code is to not abstract anything. So that means that that if that's the cost and you have to pay that, then it's more often than not, like, I think, as you rightfully pointed out, about what type of coupling are you, like, pick your poison.
Yes. That's exactly what I was going to say. So like, where I work, we suffer a lot by database coupling. And if you've got two services that share the same database, that is a coupling. And like, we often think of coupling in terms of code and abstraction, but like, Thinking about things from that perspective as well, coupling between the front end and the back end via an API, like that is also coupling. And being cognizant of how we handle these and what suits the use case best. Like, I don't foresee myself using React server components anytime soon because I don't have use cases for them. They're cool. But it's not what I need in the projects that I work on.
Yeah, I'm probably going to use them a ton for pre-rendering though, which is another thing, is and I think geez, we're basically almost out of time, and I wish we could have spoken about that. But I think the mental model of and I do actually see there are some comments, and I'll throw them on the screen now in a second. So the mental, I really like the mental model of server components, which is kind of, I think it's a natural extension of the mental model of hooks, which is in hooks, you're treating your state as a closure, basically. So it's something that encloses your components. In other words,
say like encapsulation.
Yes. So no, but the implication being, because of that closure, it's you can basically say that I'm going to know exactly what needs to update if this hook, if anything changes in this hook.
Yeah.
Like you have this clear path because it's closures, and there's no way for that hook to actually access the stuff above it, because it's a JavaScript closure, and closures just go in a single direction. What I do like is this idea of React Server. And I think you've mentioned this as well, is I actually think React Server Components is such a bad name for this thing. But then I try and think in my mind, cool, what would be a better one?
It's easy to be a critic.
And I'm like, React environments, but then people are going to be, is this like a .env, or is it, or React, and I'm like, shit, man,
components.
It's so. But I do think one of the unfortunate things of the word server in there is that there's this fixation on serialization and actually server-side rendering. But what's really cool about it is this mental model of exposing your environment as a closure. So in other words, because closures are effectively map against time. Okay, so when something runs and it calls the closures inside it, you can't go back in time. And I really like this idea of, obviously your environment runs first. So you can do things on the environment level that propagate down in the closure to your client, but you can't do it the other way around. And I really, because effectively, treating an HTTP request as an effective a closure, so it's I'm also now in danger of how do I, this is one of those things in terms of I'm trying to explain it in simpler terms, and it's I don't know how, but I just like this mental model of taking this idea of a hook as a closure and extending it beyond React itself, that the stuff that lives outside of React is also now mentally reasoned about as a closure that sits above React. And the stuff, and this is the use server, use client thing, in the same way that once you invoke this use keyword in a hook name, now you're in the world of hooks. And you can't invoke a hook outside of that context. It's almost like you press the button now you're in a hook land. And I really like the same model of use server and use client. You're in client land now. You can't go back to server land.
Instead of use clients, should have just been use.
I don't know. Once again, the naming is really bad, and then I think about what I would have called it, and everything is just worse. Okay.
One thing that I'd like to say, sorry, in closing, is people often say, "Oh, React wasn't designed." That is, whenever I see stuff like that, I generally just dismiss it immediately, because
what do you mean by not designed?
So I I read a lot of stuff in the Svelte and Solid community.
Oh, do you mean it was just like organically patched together?
Yeah,
Or...
a lot of people are like, "Oh, there's no thought put into React,"
Dude,
and that
like
stuff just grinds my gears.
What are you even talking about? Like, it's literally like React is the framework that has the least amount of breaking changes between the like. How do you do that without like?
If anything, they move really slowly because they try to make sure that they like get the APIs right.
That is so stupid. Like a lot
Let's
of
look at
this stuff,
suspense 5-6 years later. Like,
and also the stuff. A lot of the stuff you're doing in React now is still from React version 1. You know, like there's a lot of stuff that you're still doing to this day. And even if you think about the create class, you think about ES classes and hooks. All of that is the same. It's just different ways of interfacing with the exact same thing. I don't know who says that. People who haven't used React. Cool. Yeah, I have a lot of critiques against React, and definitely not that there's not enough thought put into its design. But anyway, let me quickly throw this one. There is a specific question of where do you host your Next.js apps? I'll go first, and to me, it's very easy. I don't want to pay money until I start scaling, so I'll go Netlify or Vercel, and Vercel is like a clear win for me because they have a CDN in Cape Town, and Netlify doesn't. As much as I love Netlify, Vercel is. If I'm like doing any work that's South African facing, then Vercel, period. Like I would start with, it's that kind of thing of like no one gets fired for choosing IBM. Like I would say, no, like if you're in South Africa and you're building an Next.js app, well, I would even say if you're not in South Africa, like if you're building an Next.js app and you're not hosting it on Vercel, you're probably gonna have to justify why. Not saying it's good or bad, but like I would say Vercel is just assumed to be the default by a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I am possibly gonna sound crazy. I have many projects hosted on Vercel. I would possibly reach for fly.io. Really interesting local server as well. I have also hosted a few on AWS. I'm very interested in using SST to host them. I believe you can host them via serverless function now as well. But I have just hosted them on a auto-scaling container.
Yeah, so there is
depends on the needs.
There is this thing called OpenNext, which is kind of an effort to, because there is a bit of coupling between Vercel and Next, unfortunately. And so OpenNext tries to kind of make Next a bit more agnostic. But yeah, you can definitely do it. I would just say once again, like I don't agree or disagree. I'm a massive fan of Fly. But the thing is, I think generally people people, you'd probably have to explain your reasoning if you're not using Vercel for Next.js, which once again isn't bad or good. I would just think in the common mind, like in the common, yeah, I might be wrong, but I think you understand what I'm getting at, Mike.
The default choice is most likely Vercel because
most people just assume you're using Vercel because they create Next, and like not saying they're going to do this, but they would be very much in their right if they decide, okay, like we're going to add something new to Next, and it's only going to work on Vercel. I don't think they would do that. I think that would be like public relations suicide. But yeah, like that's theoretically possible that they can just say, okay, Next 14 or 15 is just going to work on Vercel and nothing else. So at the very least, you have that going for you.
Yeah, I think by the time pricing becomes an issue, to consider some alternative like OpenNext with SST or something, or Fly, you'll have a lot of time to consider the alternatives.
It's a good problem to have. And if you're just asking that question in a vacuum, like where would you host your app, that probably means you don't have a specific problem right now. So I would actually caution against premature optimization. So don't overthink it.
Free and easy.
Yeah. So like take whatever's free. And given that between Netlify and Vercel is just like way more performant in terms of latency in South Africa, go with that. And then only solve things when they become problems. Yeah. There is also.
I've been burnt by Netlify recently. Superbase moved over to IPv6.
Yeah, I have some feelings on. I have some feelings on
Netlify projects all died.
I don't want to unpack that now, but I have some ambivalence with Net. I was probably one of the biggest early advocates for Netlify and the work they were doing, specifically in the what is called DCAP now, which was Netlify CMS back in the day, and kind of like all the Jamstack stuff and so forth. And yeah. There's been a couple of things recently. I don't know. Like, that's a tricky, hairy thing that I don't want to go into. But I have some feelings there that's making me a bit uneasy. But yeah. In terms of, is this going to be? Yeah, I'll put a link to the Figma file in the comment, in the video description. Cool. And I think that is about it. Mike, I don't know if there's anything else that's maybe worth touching, or anything you want to mention.
I mean, there are so many things, but I think this is a good point to end. I must just shut my damn mouth because we're 11 minutes over already.
And man, like we only basically got as far as what is RPC and what is React Server Components' take on RPC. Basically. Yeah. Okay. Well,
I didn't even get to evangelize Remix that much.
Yeah, like you didn't even get into like there's a ton of Remix stuff, like even the Remix SPA stuff and all of that. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, cool. But let's cap it there, and we can always continue this if I have little sleep again and the stars align.
Everyone's sick.
Yeah, cool. All right, thanks for everyone that joined, and cool. Thanks so much, Mike. Cheers, guys.